It's nearly dark in Flatwoods, West Virginia. The kids are playing on the schoolyard, a ball thumps, someone's laughing. Then a bright red streak arcs over the hill, and everything changes. I'm Mara Ellison, and this is Still Unanswered. Tonight, we go back to September 12, 1952, to walk that hill with the people who climbed it, to ask whether what they saw was an alien visitor, a misperceived animal, or something more revealing about a nation on edge.
Mara, wow, that opening always gets me. The image of the fireball alone, that's what hooked so many people in 1952. Hi, I'm Caleb Ritchie, and I study Appalachian legend and mid-century UFO waves. I've done field work in Braxton County, talked with survivors and relatives, and dug through the Project Blue Book threads. The Flatwoods case sits at the junction of folklore, fear, and perception.
Let's set the stage, Caleb. 1952 in America. What did people feel in their bones that autumn? Give us the backdrop.
Right. So 1952 is deep Cold War. McCarthy is loudly accusing communists of infiltrating American life. The Korean War is ongoing. Young men from places like Braxton County have been dying overseas. People lived with civil defense drills, duck and cover thinking, and a real constant worry about attack from above. Add to that the UFO boom. Kenneth Arnold in 1947, Roswell on the public mind, and a big Life magazine cover in April 1952 asking, "Have we visitors from space?" That piece made UFOs a mainstream conversation.
And that mainstreaming mattered. If a bright light cuts the sky, people are primed to think spacecraft, or at least something extraordinary, rather than a meteor. So a rural town like Flatwoods? What was the local scene?
Flatwoods is typical central West Virginia. Ridges, hollows, farms, small schools. Nodes of close-knit community. Families knew each other, kids played outside until dusk. Importantly, this is a culture steeped in oral tradition. Ghost stories, haints, mountain lore. Those story patterns are part of how people interpret unexpected events. It's a place where a night scare can be told, retold, and live on.
Okay, now let's walk the night in almost real time. I want us to be on that schoolyard with the kids. Who were the first witnesses?
The kids, Eddie May, about 13, Freddie May, 11, Tommy Hyer, around 10. They were playing football on the Flatwoods Elementary School playground around 7:15 p.m., just after sunset. They see a bright red object, a fireball, arc across the sky and seem to watch it descend toward a hill near G. Bailey Fisher's farm not far from the school. Others sometimes mentioned include Neil Nunley and Ronnie Shaver among the initial group.
They run for help, right? They go to the May house. Kathleen May is there. Tell us about her, Caleb.
Kathleen May was about 32 then, a former teacher, beauty parlor operator, neighbor. The boys run to her, say they saw a fireball and it landed on the hill. She looks toward the ridge and sees a strange reddish glow. Worried it could be a plane crash or something, she decides to check it out. She gathers her sons, Tommy Hyer, Neil Nunley, Eugene Gene Lemon, a young National Guardsman, and the family dog. They take a flashlight. They're not armed. Their intention, I should stress, was to investigate a possible accident, not to hunt a monster.
There's something about that detail that I always find humanizing. They went as neighbors, not as sensationalists. Walk us up the path, Caleb. The hill, the mist, the smell. What do witnesses remember?
As they walk toward Fisher's Ridge, it's getting darker. Several members later described a mist or fog near the top, and this is critical. They report a pungent, metallic, or sulfurous smell that burned their eyes and noses. The dog runs ahead, reaches the area, then comes back visibly distressed. That combination, odd light, mist, smell, a frightened dog, sets up the conditions in which perception becomes fragile. When they near the top, Neil Nunley later said they saw a pulsing red light ahead. Gene Lemon shines his flashlight toward it, and then they see something.
And that something is at the heart of the legend. I want to slow this down. Describe what Kathleen May and others said they saw when the beam hit it.
The descriptions vary in detail, but cluster around a few images. Kathleen described a tall figure. Estimates run from 7 to 10 feet in early accounts, and sometimes higher in later retellings, with a spade-shaped head or hood and a round, blood-red face within that hood. Witnesses reported glowing eyes, greenish-orange or eerie orange, and a dark body that looked like a metallic, pleated, or segmented dress extending to the ground, almost conical, with no visible legs. Long, twisted, claw-like hands were reported. Some saw it glide or move horizontally, suggesting levitation rather than walking. There are reports of a hissing or sibilant noise, too. When Gene Lemon shines the light, he reportedly screams, drops the flashlight, and the group panics and runs back down the hill.
That scream. I can picture it. Caleb, when you talked to people in Braxton County, did you feel they were embellishing, or were they genuinely recalling something terrifying?
What I encountered was a mix of both honest trauma and the normal reshaping that memory undergoes over decades. People I spoke with held to the core of the story: the fireball, the climb, the smell, the frightened dog, and the panic. But details, exact height, the precise face descriptors, whether there was a craft behind it, shift depending on who's telling and when they told it. Gray Barker's tape-recorded interviews and his subsequent framing certainly standardized a very dramatic image. That doesn't mean people were lying. It means memory is malleable, especially when a story becomes corroborated by press and later by folk retelling.
I want to pause here. Single word? Wow.
Yeah.
So they flee down the hill. What happens that night? Symptoms, police, the immediate aftermath?
After fleeing, several members reported irritated eyes, nausea, vomiting, throat irritation, symptoms they later compared to exposure to mustard gas. They report these lasting hours or days. They tell the sheriff or state police, and officers go to the area that night or soon after. Official searches find no creature. Some mention lingering odor and trampled vegetation, but no body or craft. At the same time, astronomers and Air Force investigators were collecting reports of a bright meteor or fireball seen across the eastern U.S. that evening. The Air Force would later link the Flatwoods fireball to those meteoric observations.
That brings us to Project Blue Book. Caleb, explain how the Air Force treated the case.
Project Blue Book, set up to catalog and explain UFO reports, filed the Flatwoods event under notes about a West Virginia monster, so-called. The Air Force's main focus was the bright object in the sky. They consulted astronomers and concluded there were bright meteors across parts of the eastern U.S. that night, which can explain a fireball. Blue Book didn't delve deeply into the creature imagery. Later personnel and skeptics would suggest that the creature was likely a misidentified owl combined with hysteria and physical environmental factors.
Let's give the believer's side some page space. What do proponents of an extraterrestrial or paranormal origin argue?
Believers point to a few elements. First, the timing of the fireball and the apparent change of direction suggest to them a controlled object rather than a simple meteor. Second, the metallic, pleated skirt, the gliding motion, and the alien-like face, they interpret these as either a suited extraterrestrial or a robotic probe emerging from a craft. Third, the mist and the physical symptoms, eye irritation, vomiting, are invoked as evidence of toxic exhaust or radiation. Advocates also highlight the dog's distress and accounts like Snitowski's Strange Creek story and Audra Harper's earlier sighting as signs of multiple encounters in the region. Finally, they argue that the witnesses had no obvious motive to lie and stuck to their stories for decades.
And then there are the paranormal and conspiracy variants, interdimensional entities, and government cover-ups. But let's be methodical. Caleb, what's the strongest skeptical reconstruction?
The most compelling skeptical model ties together a bright meteor, a misperceived barn owl, fog, pungent vegetation, and the psychology of fear. Joe Nickell in Skeptical Inquirer concluded that the bright object was almost certainly a meteor, widely seen that night. The monster likely was a barn owl perched in a tree or on a branch. Barn owls have a white, heart-shaped face that from certain angles can look like a spade, and their eyes can reflect a flashlight to produce red, orange, or greenish eyeshine. Their screeching or hissing is eerie and can be read as a sibilant noise. A perched owl's talons might appear as claw-like hands. Combine that with the trunk of a tree or foliage that, under an uneven flashlight beam, could read as a pleated metallic skirt. In short, meteor plus owl plus hysteria is a strong model.
It's almost disappointingly neat, but also plausible. Caleb, when you explain that to locals, how do they react? Do people in Braxton accept that?
Reactions vary. Some locals embrace the skeptical explanation and enjoy the tourism the story brings. Others, especially family members of original witnesses or people invested emotionally in the narrative, find the owl explanation reductive. Gray Barker's early framing of the event as an alien encounter is part of what made many people reluctant to accept a bird as the culprit. There's also a cultural pride element. The monster has become part of Braxton identity. Turning it into a mere owl can feel like erasing a story the town now owns.
Let's talk about Gray Barker. He shaped public perception, right?
Yes. Gray Barker, a West Virginia UFO writer, conducted tape-recorded interviews and wrote about the case in Fate magazine and other venues. His framing emphasized the 10-foot height, the blood-red face, the pointed hood, and the glowing eyes, details that became canonical. Barker's work preserved the story, but also promoted a sensationalized version. Later critics pointed out that Barker was sometimes given to sensationalism, and that his focus likely standardized a particular dramatic image.
So Barker curated the legend, and the Air Force focused on the sky. Meanwhile, Inland Press turned it into headlines. What happened to the story after 1952? How did it grow?
The story spread quickly across West Virginia and then nationally. Regional newspapers picked it up with headlines about a green monster or Braxton County monster. Early ufologists folded in other local anecdotes. Audra Harper's silhouette sighting near Heaters and the Snitowski's Strange Creek story the next night, creating a pattern that suggested the phenomenon wasn't isolated. Over time, the creature collected nicknames: Flatwoods Monster, Braxy, Phantom of Flatwoods. It evolved from a local scare into a piece of national UFO folklore and a regional icon.
Let's pause for a short reaction. And then, tourism. Tell me about how the town leaned into the monster.
Braxton County embraced the legend. There's a Flatwoods Monster Museum in Sutton. Souvenir ceramic lanterns originally made by the Braxton County Junior Chamber of Commerce, the Flatwoods Monster chairs placed around town, Signage, welcome to Flatwoods, home of the Green Monster. Monster art in local businesses, an ice cream shop using monster imagery, even a Flatwoods Monster burger. Those ceramic lanterns are among the longest produced souvenirs and are still made and sold. The monster became a brand, bringing visitors and money into a small rural economy.
It's a classic story of turning fear into folklore and then into a revenue stream. There's a poignant shift there.
Absolutely. What was a terrifying night became something people could point to and say, that's our story. It's also how communities own their weird history and turn potential stigma into pride. Mara, this is similar to what we've seen with other regional cryptids, Mothman in Point Pleasant, for instance.
Yes, Mothman is the immediate comparison. Both are West Virginia cases that shifted from scary sightings to cultural icons. But I want to circle back to physical symptoms people reported: burning eyes, nausea. Skeptics say they're psychosomatic or from vegetation. Supporters say they're evidence of actual exposure. What does the record allow us to say?
Documentation is limited. Witnesses reported real symptoms, and that's important. People did suffer irritation. But rural 1952 medical records are scarce. Natural explanations include irritant plants or particles in fog that could cause burning eyes and nausea. Panic and acute stress can also produce vomiting and throat irritation. The mustard gas comparison was used at the time because the smell was described as metallic or sulfurous, but there's no concrete evidence of chemical agents. The record supports that symptoms occurred, but it doesn't decisively show their cause.
That nuance is crucial. Now, what about the Harper and Snitowski stories? Are they corroborating evidence or later folklore?
Both have issues. Audra Harper's heaters sighting is an earlier anecdote of a ball of fire and later a tall silhouette. Some take it as a precursor. The Snitowski Strange Creek encounter, published in 1955, tells of a hovering reptilian-headed creature that interacted with a car. Neither has the documentation rigor of the Flatwoods Group's account. Skeptics point to late publication dates, lack of corroboration, and differing descriptions. Snitowski's reptilian head doesn't match the spade hood of Flatwoods. These accounts may reflect genuine experiences, or they may be folkloric backfill, people pattern-matching later events to the Flatwoods legend.
Let's take a breath. Single word? Interesting.
Right.
Caleb, you mentioned Project Blue Book concluded the sky object was likely a meteor, yet some still suggest it was controlled or even a craft. What reasons do they give for thinking the fireball wasn't just a meteor?
Advocates of a controlled object point to perceived changes in direction and the apparent landing on the hill. They argue the object's brightness and trajectory were unusual. Some suggest it left sparks or exhibited motion atypical for a meteor. But from an observational standpoint, bright meteors can look like they change course or land because of perspective. Something streaking and then descending below the horizon can appear to crash nearby. Astronomy reports that night documented bright meteors along the East Coast, supporting the Air Force's meteor explanation.
So the optics of perspective make a lot of the landing feel close and local. I want to bring us back to human perception. How does fear affect what people see, especially in groups and with children involved?
Group perception under stress is fascinating. Children are highly suggestible, and adults can be too. If one child screams "monster," others' memories can align with that initial panic. A mother, worried about a crash, has a psychological frame that primes her to interpret ambiguous stimuli catastrophically. The media feedback loop compounds this. Newspapers call it a monster, UFO writers frame it as extraterrestrial, and repeated retellings nudge memories toward the canonical image. Importantly, suggestion doesn't mean dishonesty. People can honestly recall a version of events that has been subtly reshaped by subsequent narrative reinforcement.
That's a delicate point. Memory is not a recording. Let's be explicit. The barn owl explanation. Walk us step by step. How could that bird look like a hovering, armored humanoid with glowing eyes?
Step 1. The flashlight. An owl perched on a branch several feet off the ground, illuminated by a handheld beam, can have its white, heart-shaped face reflect light. An owl's eyeshine can appear red, orange, or green depending on angle. That white face, seen through foliage or a hooded tree silhouette, can read as a spade-shaped hood with a round red face inside it. Step 2. Body shape. A tree trunk, hung branches, and a clustered bush, backlit or lit unevenly, can produce a vertical, pleated-looking silhouette interpretable as a metallic dress or skirt. Step 3. Hands and claws. An owl tucking forward with extended talons can be read as long, claw-like hands. Step 4. Motion and sound. An owl's screech or hiss is unnerving. Viewed by frightened people, primed by a bright fireball and a bad smell, the pattern-matching brain can assemble a humanoid monster from these elements. It's not speculation invented for the case. Joe Nickell and others laid this out in Skeptical Inquirer and Snopes, and it aligns with known owl anatomy and behavior.
I've heard that explanation many times, and it fits a lot of the documented sensory elements. Yet people push back. They say the monster seemed to levitate, to glide. How would an owl explain that?
Perceived levitation can be an artifact of incomplete visual cues. If an owl is perched and a person only sees a brief, partial silhouette in a flashlight sweep, the brain can infer motion where there is none. Also, branches can move slightly in a breeze, making something appear to glide. Memory embellishment over time can change perched into gliding as stories are retold. The important thing is that an owl can produce a humanoid silhouette and unsettling noises, enough to generate fear that becomes a strong, durable memory.
You mentioned earlier that some witnesses compared the smell to mustard gas. That's such a vivid Cold War image. How much did the era's chemical warfare fears shape interpretation?
Massively. The 1950s public imagination was saturated with images of gas, rockets, and unseen threats. Describing an odor as mustard gas-like immediately evokes military, chemical, or governmental danger. In a community already grieving young men lost in Korea and living with civil defense drills, an unfamiliar smell takes on ominous meaning. So even an earthy, sulfurous odor from plants or mist can be coded as something dangerously chemical if the cultural frame supplies that vocabulary.
So culture provides the vocabulary for the experience. I want to pivot. What about the longer cultural afterlife? How does the Flatwoods Monster compare to other Appalachian legends? And what does its transformation into tourism say about memory?
Flatwoods follows a familiar trajectory. An unsettling event becomes a coherent narrative, then a symbol. Compare Flatwoods to Mothman. Both are West Virginia phenomena that begin with fear and, over time, get domesticated. Festivals, museums, souvenirs. The transformation into tourism is telling. Communities take control of a narrative that could shame or frighten and instead monetize and celebrate it. That process can preserve the story but also freeze one variant, the canonical image, in place. The town's identity shifts. The monster is a memory and a commodity.
There's a bittersweetness there. Caleb, you've done field work. What's the most striking thing locals tell you now about that night?
They often return to two themes. First, the terror of being confronted with something they couldn't explain. Second, the way the story has become part of community life. Some family members are proud that their relative's experience remains central to a famous tale. Others find the commercialization odd. Nearly everyone agrees on the core. There was a bright object, and there was an encounter that left people shaken. But beyond that shared spine, details and meanings diverge.
Let's do a short interjection. Oh.
Hmm.
Gray Barker standardizes the image. Project Blue Book says meteor. Skeptics say owl. Locals turn it into museum pieces. What, in your view, remains genuinely unanswered?
Several things. First, the exact nature of the smell and the health symptoms, were they chemical, botanical, psychosomatic? We lack definitive medical or environmental tests. Second, the details that differ among witnesses, height, head shape, presence of a craft, remain inconsistent, making it impossible to reconstruct every physical attribute with confidence. Third, the role of early investigators in shaping the story. To what extent did leading questions or sensational reporting influence later recollection? Finally, the broader question: why did this particular event become a durable legend while many other rural scares faded? Those answers are partly historical, partly anthropological, and partly about how communities choose to remember.
That last one is fascinating. The sociology of legend. Let's bring the skeptics and believers into dialogue. Caleb, what would you say to someone who insists the owl explanation is insulting to witnesses?
I'd say this. Proposing an owl as the most plausible natural explanation is not an insult to witnesses' sincerity. It's an attempt to match sensory detail to known phenomena. People truly experienced fear and symptoms. They were sincere. What skeptics challenge is not honesty, but interpretation. Memory is reconstructive. The owl hypothesis preserves witnesses' experiences, bright fireball, mist, smell, frightening silhouette, while offering a parsimonious account. Respectful skepticism acknowledges the lived trauma while seeking to explain it in natural terms.
And to someone who says, but the object looked controlled and the dog was ill, how does that fit the owl model?
Perspective and coincidence. A bright meteor can look like it changes direction because of optical illusions. Dogs are sensitive to scent and sound. Being startled or encountering a pungent smell could distress a dog. As for illness, environmental irritants or panic reactions can cause real symptoms. The skeptical model doesn't explain every nuance to every person's satisfaction, but it ties many elements together coherently without invoking entities for which there is no material evidence.
Okay, we're closing in on an hour of deep dive here. So let's do a tighter wrap. Caleb, summarize for our listeners. What should they take away from the Flatwoods Monster story?
Takeaway 1. Context matters. Cold War fears, UFO fever from the late 1940s and early 1950s, and local folklore primed people to interpret ambiguous events as extraordinary. Takeaway 2. Perception is fallible but powerful. The witness's terror was real and shaped by sensory cues, light, smell, sound, plus expectant cultural narratives. Takeaway 3. Explanations range from meteor owl hysteria to extraterrestrial visitor, and reasonable people can differ. Finally, even when a natural explanation fits, the story's cultural life, the museum, souvenirs, community identity, reveals how people turn alarming events into meaning, memory, and sometimes a little town's livelihood.
Beautifully said. One last question for you, Caleb, personally. After doing field work and reading the sources, which way do you lean?
I lean toward the meteor plus barn owl plus psychosocial model. It accounts for the sky object, the sensory details, and the variations in witness description. That said, I also respect why people find the extraterrestrial interpretation compelling. There's an affective and narrative power to it. The enduring lesson for me is less about pronouncing the final cause and more about understanding how stories like Flatwoods sit at the crossroads of fear, culture, and memory.
Agree. Let's leave our listeners with a final scene. Imagine climbing that ridge at dusk, the schoolyard empty, a red streak overhead, a mist seeping over the trees, a smell that makes you cough, a flashlight beam catching on something that looks like part machine, part living thing. You scream, you run, you tell the story, and years later, you see it on a museum sign and a souvenir lantern. What was the thing on the hill? Maybe it was the impossible. Maybe it was an owl. Maybe the real mystery is how a night of fear turned into a story a county tells itself for generations.
So that's the Flatwoods Monster part memory, part spectacle, part Appalachian legend. Until we can test the hill and the fog and find a lost craft or a preserved owl, the details will keep floating between the natural and the uncanny. But either way, the case tells us a lot about mid-century America.
Thanks, Caleb. And thanks to everyone who keeps asking the question, what happened on that hilltop? If you want to dive deeper, we've listed archival sources and modern analyses, Project Blue Book notes, local Braxton pages, Joe Nichols' skeptical article, Gray Barker's early write-ups, so you can read along and make up your own mind.
And if anyone from Braxton wants to write to us and share family memories, send them our way. Listening to local voices is how we keep these stories honest and human.
That's it for this episode of Still Unanswered. I'm Mara Ellison. Caleb Ritchie, thanks for walking the ridge with me tonight.
Thanks, Mara. Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
Good night. And watch the sky.